I was lying on my back, staring up at the sky, feeling as relaxed as a lazy otter enjoying life, when suddenly I heard someone shouting from the shore, "You're breaking HOA rules." That's how I found out I was apparently committing a crime just by swimming in my own lake. Some nearby HOA had decided that my peaceful morning swim was a threat to community safety, even though they didn't own an inch of my land. What started as a strange complaint quickly escalated into fines, surveillance, neighborhood drama, and hands down the most absurd HOA meltdown I've ever witnessed. I thought it would blow over. It didn't. Ever been fined for using your own backyard? Ever met someone who believes HOA stands for highly obsessed authority? Drop your city in the comments if you've survived dealing with a power-tripping HOA. We might need to start a support group. You won't believe how wild this gets. My name's Patrick Scott. I'm 34, a freelance graphic designer, and I live on a 25-acre ranch I inherited from my grandmother 3 years ago. The property is about 200 yards from a new housing development called Meadowbrook Estates, which comes with its own homeowners association and all the headaches that go with it. My ranch boasts a stunning natural lakefront that's been in my family for over 3 decades. Every morning at 6, I grab a coffee and head down to the lake for a swim. It's peaceful, private, and just perfect, my little slice of heaven. That Tuesday morning started like any other. I rolled out of bed, brewed some coffee, and made my way down to the lake in my swim trunks. The water was perfect, cool but not cold, crystal clear so I could see the sandy bottom. I eased myself in, savoring that first shock of coolness on my skin, then pushed off into my usual backstroke. That's when I heard it. "Hey, you can't swim there." I flipped over, treading water, and saw a woman in her late 30s striding across the grass toward my shoreline. She was dressed in what looked like a business suit at 7 a.m., complete with flats that definitely weren't made for walking through dew-soaked grass. Her brown hair was pulled back into a tight ponytail, and she had a look on her face like she'd just caught someone stealing her morning paper. "That's my lakefront, ma'am," I called out, still floating calmly. I figured she was just a confused neighbor who'd taken a wrong turn on her morning walk. This is private property, after all. But instead of apologizing and leaving, she planted her feet at the water's edge and crossed her arms. "I'm Samantha Harris, president of the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association," she announced as if introducing royalty. "This affects everyone in our community." I couldn't help but chuckle as I treaded water. "How exactly does me swimming in my own lakefront impact your community?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Your neighborhood is way over there." I pointed toward the cluster of cookie-cutter houses visible through the trees. "And my lakefront is right here, on my private property." Samantha's face flushed a bright shade of red that clashed horribly with her outfit. "Safety regulations clearly state that any water activities within the community impact zone require HOA approval," she declared, pulling out her phone. I watched in disbelief as she started snapping pictures of me floating in my own lake. "Community impact zone," I repeated, trying to hide my skepticism. "Lady, I hate to break it to you, but your HOA doesn't have any authority over my family's ranch." She kept snapping photos like I was some criminal. "We'll see about that," she said curtly. "You'll be hearing from us." With that pleasant little threat, she turned and marched back toward the housing development, leaving soggy footprints in my grass. I floated there for a moment, stunned, wondering what the hell had just happened. I finished my swim, toweled off, and tried to shrug off the strange encounter. I've dealt with difficult clients before, but this was a whole new level of crazy. As I headed back up to the house, I chuckled to myself. I'd always thought HOAs cared about things like tall grass and the wrong mailbox colors. Guess they upgraded to water police now. I figured Samantha was just having a rough morning, maybe some divorce drama or work stress, and she took it out on the first person she saw. Surely, a grown woman wouldn't seriously try to penalize someone for swimming on their own property. That would be insane, right? I grabbed another cup of coffee, settled into my home office, and tried to focus on the logo design I was working on for a client in Portland. But I kept glancing out the window toward the lakefront, half expecting Samantha to come marching back with backup. The rest of the day went by normally. I worked on projects, took a lunch break on the porch overlooking the lake, and even squeezed in an afternoon swim without any HOA drama. By evening, I'd almost forgotten the whole thing. I grilled some chicken, cracked open a beer, and watched the sunset turn the lake gold and orange. Life was good. My little piece of paradise was untouched. Work was going well, and I wasn't about to let some uptight HOA president ruin my perfect lakefront routine. I figured she was all talk, no bite. Then the yellow envelope showed up in my mailbox 3 days later, and I was dead wrong. Friday afternoon. I was driving back from a client meeting in town when I spotted the official-looking envelope sticking out of my mailbox like a warning flag. The return address was Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, bold and black. My stomach flipped. Part of me hoped it was an apology, maybe Samantha explaining she'd had a tough week and was sorry for the misunderstanding. I should have known better. I tore open the envelope right there at the mailbox. The first thing I saw was a $500 violation notice and fine, the header shouting in threatening capital letters. The letter began with a stern declaration. I was officially notified that I had violated Meadowbrook Estates HOA regulations, specifically Section 4.2.2. covering lakefront safety and community standards. Unauthorized water activities had been spotted on my property, allegedly creating potential risks and liabilities for the neighborhood. I read the letter twice, then a third time, convinced this had to be some kind of prank. Lakefront safety rule: a broken bar through my lakefront, I muttered to myself. The notice went on to accuse my harmless morning swim of endangering the entire community and gave me 30 days to pay the fine or face further legal consequences. At the bottom, Samantha's signature sprawled across the page, looking less like a signature and more like a sentence of doom. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the map app, zooming in on my property to make sure I hadn't lost my mind. Nope, there it was. My ranch, my property lines, my lakefront, sitting a solid 200 yards away from the nearest HOA house. I took a screenshot and sent it to my brother Steve, who's a lawyer down in Austin. Bro, can an HOA really fine me for swimming in my own lake? I typed, attaching the violation notice photo. Steve called back, laughing. Patrick, what did you do to tick off your neighbors? I just took my usual morning swim in my own lake, I said. Apparently, that's a $500 offense now. His laughter faded as I read the whole violation notice word for word. Hell no, he said firmly. That's your land, your lakefront. They have zero authority over what you do there. This is either someone who doesn't understand property law, or someone trying to bully you into submission. Either way, you don't owe them a dime. Feeling backed by my brother's legal advice and fueled by righteous frustration, I decided to pay Samantha a little visit. The HOA office was located in a small strip mall about 10 minutes from my ranch, squeezed between a nail salon and a tax prep service. The office itself was exactly what you'd expect: a single room with cheap paneling, fluorescent lights, and crooked motivational posters about community pride. Samantha sat behind a metal desk that looked like it came from a government surplus auction, wearing another business suit that screamed "trying too hard." When I walked in, she looked up with a smug grin, as if she'd been waiting for me. "Mr. Scott," she said without standing or offering a handshake, "I assume you're here about your violation notice." "I am," I said, settling into one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs. "I have a simple question. Do you have authority over private property that isn't part of your HOA?" Samantha shuffled some papers, clearly buying time. "This is about community impact," she said, dodging my question. "When activities on adjacent properties create safety concerns or affect property values, the HOA has a responsibility to act." I pulled out my phone and showed her the screenshot of my property lines. "Here's the deal, Samantha," I said, tilting the screen toward her. "Here's my fence, here's my lakefront, and here's your neighborhood. See that gap? That's private property, and your HOA has zero say in what happens here." Her face started turning that familiar red again. I could see her jaw tighten. "You're being disrespectful, Mr. Scott," she snapped through clenched teeth. "Since you want to be difficult, the fine is now $750. I sat there a moment, letting the ridiculousness sink in. This woman had just hiked my fine by $250 for the crime of asking if she had authority. "Let me get this straight," I said slowly. "You've now fined me $750 for swimming in my own lakefront?" She nodded curtly, as if she'd just won a brilliant legal battle. "Payment is due within 30 days, or we'll be forced to take further action." I stood, pocketed my phone, and headed for the door. "Good luck with that," I called over my shoulder. "By the way, you might want to brush up on property law before sending out more violation notices." The door chimed behind me as I left, and I could feel Samantha's furious glare burning into my back. Driving home, I felt a mix of disbelief and determination welling up inside me. This wasn't some confused neighbor having a bad day. Samantha genuinely believed she had the right to control what I did on my own property. The fact she doubled down and raised the fine told me everything I needed to know. She was used to people backing down when she raised her voice, used to intimidating folks with her little strip mall office and official-looking letters. Well, she picked the wrong guy. I hadn't just inherited land from my grandmother. I'd inherited her stubborn streak and her refusal to let bullies win. Samantha thought upping the fine would scare me off. She had no idea I was just getting started. That weekend, I called Steve for a longer talk about my legal options. "You're 100% right," he confirmed. "But you've got to be smart about this. You can't ignore her and let her waste money on a lawyer who'll tell her she has no case. Or you can be proactive." He suggested I document everything and reach out to neighbors to see if anyone else had dealt with similar harassment. The more people aware of what she's doing, the harder it would be for her to keep pushing this nonsense. So I drafted a simple, friendly email to everyone in the Meadowbrook Estates community. I wasn't looking to start a war. I just wanted folks to understand what was going on. What I really wanted was to get the truth out there, so I kept the email short and straightforward. "Hi neighbors, I'm Patrick, the owner of the lakefront ranch just outside your community. Your HOA president has fined me $750 for swimming at my own property. If you think that's reasonable, I'll pay up and apologize. If not, please take a look at these photos showing where my property ends and where your neighborhood begins. I'm not trying to cause trouble. I just believe people should know what their HOA is doing in their name. Thanks, Patrick." I attached several photos, clear shots of the property lines, the wide distance between my lakefront and their homes, plus a copy of the violation notice. I sent the email to about 40 addresses I found online. The responses came quickly and were mixed. About half the replies were supportive. Some neighbors shared their own frustrations with Samantha's heavy-handed leadership. A few told stories about absurd fines for petty things like leaving trash cans out too long or using the wrong paint color on their doors. But there were also residents siding with Samantha, worried that any criticism of the home might hurt their property values. One woman, Linda Peterson, even sent me a lecture about respecting community authority and how some rules exist for everyone's benefit. What I didn't know then was why Linda was so eager to defend Samantha. During a community meeting later, I overheard Linda whispering to another resident about Samantha's past. Apparently, Samantha had lost a legal battle over lakefront property back in 2017. Someone had filled in her family's old swimming hole to build a resort, and she couldn't stop it because she lacked proper legal documentation. Maybe that explained her obsession with controlling access to the water. It was the tragedy of people wanting so badly to belong to something that they lose sight of right and wrong. Within a few days, I started noticing Linda walking past my property, phone in hand, clearly taking photos or videos of my lakefront activities. She wasn't subtle. She'd stand right at my fence line, phone raised like she was gathering evidence for a trial. At first, it was just irritating. Then I realized it could actually work in my favor. If Samantha wanted surveillance footage of me swimming in my own lake, I was going to give her the best show possible. I began timing my swims around when Linda was most likely to be on patrol. I waved cheerfully at her camera as I swam laps, sometimes even calling out, "Good morning, Linda." Getting good footage, things escalated when Samantha called an emergency home meeting, citing what she called ongoing community disruption. The meeting was held at the Meadowbrook Estates Community Center, a beige building that looked like every other community center built in the 90s. I wasn't officially invited, since I wasn't a resident, but the meeting was supposedly open to the public, so I showed up anyway. About 15 people were scattered among the folding chairs, and you could feel the tension in the air the moment I walked in. Samantha was already at the front, PowerPoint loaded, wearing a look that was priceless, like she just found out the IRS was auditing her personal finances. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, clicking to her first slide, "we're here tonight because one individual has decided to undermine HOA authority and disrupt our community peace." She had prepared a full presentation about me, complete with photos of my lakefront, charts showing property values, and warnings about neighborhoods with unregulated water activities. It was impressively paranoid. I had to give her credit. She spent a solid 10 minutes talking about liability, insurance concerns, and the importance of upholding community standards. When she finished, she scanned the room, probably expecting applause. Instead, she was met with awkward silence and a few confused looks. "That's quite a presentation," I said, standing up from my chair near the back. "Mind if I share a different perspective?" I pulled out my phone and opened the photos I'd prepared, clear images of my property lines, measurements showing the distance between my lake and their houses, and I pulled up copies of my property deed and tax records on my phone and held it up so everyone could see. "Here's my fence," I said, "here's the lakefront, and here's your neighborhood. Any questions about which property belongs to whom?" A woman in the front row raised her hand hesitantly. "So the lake isn't part of our HOA?" she asked. "Nope," I said cheerfully. "It's been in my family for 30 years. I inherited it from my grandmother along with the ranch." An older man with a puzzled look glanced back and forth between me and Samantha. "Then why are we fining him for using his own property?" Samantha's face flushed a familiar shade of red. "This is about community standards and safety concerns," she insisted. "What if someone gets hurt on that lake? What if it becomes a nuisance? What if it affects our property values?" I couldn't help but smile at her desperation. "What if aliens land in my backyard and ask to speak to your manager?" I replied. "We could worry about all that day and night, but the bottom line is simple. It's my property, and your HOA has zero authority over what I do on it." The room buzzed with murmurs and side conversations as people started to realize how absurd the whole situation was. About half the residents seemed genuinely shocked that Samantha had been issuing fines for activities on private property. The other half looked uneasy about the public confrontation. Linda Peterson, sitting in the second row, suddenly raised her hand and stood up with dramatic flair. "I think we're missing the bigger picture here," she announced. "This is about respect for community leadership and following proper procedures." She shot me a pointed look. "Some people think they can do whatever they want without considering how it affects others." I nodded thoughtfully, as if weighing her words seriously. "You're absolutely right, Linda. People should definitely consider how their actions affect others. For example, maybe HOA presidents should consider whether they actually have legal authority before issuing fines to people who don't even live in their community." The meeting ended with no resolution, just awkward shuffling and promises to look further into the matter. As people filed out, a few came over to shake my hand and apologize for the harassment I'd endured. But I noticed Samantha and Linda huddled in a corner, clearly plotting their next move. Her face was as red as a tomato. I should have known this was just the calm before the storm. Monday morning brought a new level of chaos to my peaceful ranch life. I was barely halfway through my first cup of coffee when a white county vehicle pulled into my driveway. A man in a crisp uniform stepped out, clipboard in hand, and I immediately knew Samantha had escalated this beyond the HOA's imaginary jurisdiction. The inspector introduced himself as Bill Matthews from the County Code Enforcement Department. He seemed genuinely sorry to have to be there. "I received a complaint about unpermitted water activities on your property," he explained, looking around my well-kept ranch. "Someone reported possible safety violations and zoning infractions. I'm required to investigate, but honestly, this feels more like a neighbor dispute than a real code violation." I invited Bill down to the lakefront and gave him a full tour. He was thorough but friendly, checking property boundaries, examining the natural features of the lake, and asking about how long my family had owned the land. "This is a beautiful setup," he said, watching a family of ducks glide across the clear water. "Natural lake, well-maintained property. Everything looks perfectly legal to me." That's when Samantha appeared, marching across the grass like she owned the place. She'd obviously been waiting nearby for the inspector. "Officer Matthews," she called out, slightly out of breath, "I'm so glad you're here." "As I explained in my complaint," she said, These unauthorized water activities are creating serious safety and liability concerns for our entire community. Bill turned to Samantha with the calm patience of someone used to this kind of drama. "Ma'am, I've completed my inspection, and everything here is perfectly legal," he said. "This is private property with a natural water feature that's been here for decades. No permits are required, no violations found." Samantha's mouth fell open, stunned. "But what about the community impact?" she protested. "What about our insurance liability? What about property values?" Bill looked from Samantha to me, then back again. "Ma'am, this gentleman's activities on his private property have no bearing on your community's insurance or property values. My advice, focus on actual HOA business and leave private property owners alone." After Bill left, I realized it was time to get more proactive about protecting myself from Samantha's growing harassment. I drove into town and picked up a basic trail camera system of the kind hunters use to monitor wildlife. Nothing fancy, just enough to document any future trespassing or harassment. I set up a camera overlooking the lakefront area where Samantha and Linda had been conducting their surveillance. I also decided to extend an olive branch. That weekend, I invited a few of the more reasonable neighbors over for a lakefront barbecue. If people could see Thea, if more people saw the property for themselves, they'd realize just how absurd Samantha's complaints really were. That Saturday afternoon, 6 neighbors showed up for burgers and beers by the lake. It was exactly the kind of laid-back gathering Samantha probably thought was a neighborhood nuisance. We relaxed under the setting sun, and everyone agreed the lakefront was clearly private. "I had no idea your land was so far from our development," admitted Tom Wilson, a retired teacher who'd lived in Meadowbrook Estates for 5 years. "Samantha made it sound like you were swimming right outside our backyards." Linda Peterson had positioned herself again at my fence line, at this time with what looked like an actual camera, not just her phone. I waved at her from my lawn chair and called out, "Hey Linda, want a burger? Plenty of food here." The irony wasn't lost on my guests. Here we were, enjoying a peaceful barbecue on private property, while Linda documented every move like we were planning a bank heist. "Does she do this often?" asked Sarah Chen, a nurse living on the far side of the development. "Pretty much every day since this whole thing started," I replied, taking a sip of my beer. "I think she's hoping to catch me doing something illegal, but so far all she's got is footage of me swimming and grilling burgers." Everyone laughed, and I could see Linda growing more frustrated as she realized her surveillance was just entertainment for my guests. After watching Linda for weeks, I began to understand her motivation. She'd lived quietly in the neighborhood for years, never really part of any social groups or activities. When Samantha recruited her for this spying mission, it was probably the first time Linda had felt important or needed in years. That's the tragedy of people who want to belong somewhere so badly. They're willing to abandon their moral compass just to feel included. But Samantha wasn't giving up. The following week, she launched what I can only call a social media campaign against me. She posted daily updates warning about ongoing safety concerns from unregulated water activities in the area. She stopped just short of naming me, but everyone in the community knew exactly who she meant. Her posts were masterpieces of paranoid rambling, warnings about everything from mosquito-borne diseases to increased traffic from curious visitors wanting to see the lake. The responses were mixed, but I noticed more and more people questioning her fixation on my private property. One commenter wrote, "Isn't Samantha talking about the guy who lives outside our community? Why do we care what he does on his own land?" Linda's surveillance tactics escalated too. She'd upgraded from casual phone videos to standing at my fence with a professional-looking camera, documenting my swims like she was filming a nature documentary. I decided to have some fun with it. I started timing my swims to match her patrol schedule, waving cheerfully and calling out, "Good morning, Linda, getting some good footage today?" I treated her like a friendly neighbor instead of a hostile spy. The more normal I acted, the more ridiculous she looked standing there with her camera. A few times, I even set up a lawn chair facing her and pretended to film her filming me. 2 people with cameras pointed at each other across a property line. It was like a suburban standoff. Things hit a new level of absurdity when Samantha began labeling my swims neighborhood disruption events and sending email alerts every time I was in the water. Alerts like, unauthorized water activities currently in progress at lakefront property. Residents advised to document any impacts on community peace and safety. I found out about these alerts when Tom Wilson forwarded me one with the message, "This is getting seriously weird, dude." I realized Samantha's desperation was backfiring. The more extreme she got, the more reasonable I looked by comparison. People were starting to see her for what she really was, someone who'd let a tiny bit of power go completely to her head. I thought she'd quit after the county inspector's visit and the community backlash, but instead, she decided to take things into her own hands. The trail camera I'd set up to capture wildlife, maybe some deer drinking at dawn or a family of raccoons washing their food, caught something way more interesting. Thursday morning, I was reviewing the previous night's footage when I dropped my coffee mug in shock. At 5:37 a.m., clear as day, the camera recorded Samantha Harris sneaking across my property line like a suburban ninja. She was dressed in dark clothes, moving carefully, trying not to be seen or heard, but the infrared camera caught every detail of her early morning trespass. The footage was even worse than I'd thought. Samantha didn't just cross my property, she headed straight for the lakefront, carrying a small container in her right hand. I had to rewind and watch it twice because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I paused the video, zoomed in on the container, and felt my blood run cold. There was a faded label on it. At 25 hours 14 minutes, the camera showed an orange warning symbol like the ones you see on hazardous materials, and the audio picked up her quietly muttering to herself. As she neared the water's edge, she said, "This will prove it's not safe." Then, crystal clear, she opened the container and poured its contents into my lake. A cold shiver ran down my spine, as if someone had slipped a poison into the heart of my peaceful sanctuary. The timestamp revealed she spent less than 3 minutes on my property before sneaking back the way she came. But those brief minutes were enough to catch clear evidence of criminal trespassing and intentional damage to property. I watched the footage over and over, making sure I wasn't hallucinating. Then immediately called my brother Steve. "Holy crap, she actually did it," I told him when he picked up the phone, still groggy from being woken early. "Samantha trespassed on my land and dumped something into my lake. I've got the whole thing on video." Suddenly, Steve was wide awake. "Tell me you're kidding," he said. "Nope, I have crystal clear footage of her sneaking onto my property at 5:30 a.m. and dumping some kind of chemical into the water." There was a long pause before he answered, "Patrick, that's not just trespassing, that's deliberate property damage, possibly environmental vandalism, and depending on what she dumped, it could be a felony. You need to call the police right now." But I had another plan forming in my mind. Sure, calling the police would get Samantha in trouble, but I wanted her to personally feel the weight of what she'd done rather than having law enforcement handle it immediately. I decided to confront her myself, armed with the evidence, and offer her a chance to fix this. I added up the costs. Testing the water to ensure safety would run about $500. My time dealing with the fallout, at least $1,000. The trail camera system cost me $500, and the stress and hassle from her harassment campaign easily added another $3,000. Rounded up, $5,000 seemed like a fair sum for trespassing and damage. I copied the video footage to my laptop and asked Steve to come up for the weekend as a witness when I confronted her. That Saturday evening, Steve and I drove to Samantha's house in Meadowbrook Estates. It was a modest 2-story colonial, indistinguishable from the other homes on her street. A beige siding, a small front yard, and a mailbox that likely met every HOA rule down to the exact shade of black. Samantha answered the door in a bathrobe and slippers, clearly not expecting visitors. Her expression shifted from confusion to alarm when she saw me standing there, laptop bag in hand. "What are you doing here?" she asked, instinctively stepping back. "I need to show you something important," I said calmly. "Mind if we come in for a minute?" Steve introduced himself as my brother and legal advisor, which made Samantha visibly more nervous. We settled into her living room, decorated in the same aggressively bland beige style as the HOA office. I set my laptop on the coffee table and pulled up the security footage. "I thought you'd want to see what my wildlife camera caught Thursday night," I said, hitting play. Samantha's face strained of color as she watched herself sneak across my property before dawn. When the video showed her dumping the container into my lake, she gasped and covered her mouth. "That's not what it looks like," she stammered. But we all knew the truth. She was caught red-handed. "Really?" I replied. "Because it looks like you trespassed at 5:30 a.m. and dumped chemicals into my lake while muttering about proving the water's unsafe." "I was just checking for safety," Samantha tried to explain, but her voice trembled and she avoided eye contact with either of us. Steve asked pointedly, "What exactly did you dump in the lake?" Her story kept shifting. First water samples, then algae treatment, then a claim about improving water quality. Each explanation sounded more absurd than the last, and the video made it clear that whatever she dumped was meant to cause harm, not fix anything. Finally, I cut through her rambling excuses. "Samantha, you trespassed on my property and deliberately contaminated my lake. You owe me $5,000 for the damage and harassment." Her reaction was immediate and predictable. "That's ridiculous. I'll never pay you a dime," she shouted, jumping up from her chair. "This is all your fault for not following community standards." I closed my laptop and stood up calmly. "Okay," I said, "we'll let the police and the county environmental department handle it then. Dumping unknown chemicals into a natural water source is a serious crime." That got her attention. Steve handed her his business card and explained she had 72 hours to contact us with a payment plan before we filed criminal complaints and civil lawsuits. "Have a nice evening," I said as we headed for the door. "Oh, and Samantha, you might want to stay off my property from now on. I've got cameras everywhere." Samantha slammed the door in my face. A huge mistake, because now this was going public. Her response to being caught red-handed was exactly what I expected from someone unused to real consequences. Instead of apologizing or offering to make amends, she doubled down on playing the victim. On Monday morning, she posted a lengthy rant on the community forum, accusing me of harassing a single mother and trying to destroy her reputation with fake videos. She claimed the footage was edited and that I was intimidating her to drop her legitimate concerns about my lake. She urged everyone to rally behind her against the outside agitator threatening their community values. A masterclass in manipulation designed to paint herself as the victim instead of the criminal trespasser she really was. My response was simple and effective. I posted the unedited security footage with a clear caption, "Here's what really happened." No edits, no commentary, just the facts. Judge for yourself. The video spoke louder than any argument ever could. Clear footage showed Samantha sneaking onto my property, dumping chemicals into my lake, and muttering about how it would prove the water was unsafe. Within hours, my post exploded with dozens of comments from neighbors shocked that their own HOA president had committed criminal trespassing and environmental vandalism. Even some of Samantha's staunchest supporters began distancing themselves once they saw the undeniable proof of her pre-dawn misdeed. Linda Peterson, who'd been Samantha's loudest defender throughout the whole ordeal, stunned everyone by posting a public comment that changed everything. "I had no idea Samantha was actually breaking the law. I thought we were just raising safety concerns, not witnessing a crime. Patrick, I owe you an apology." Several other neighbors echoed Linda's sentiments, admitting they'd been misled by Samantha's fear tactics about lakefront safety and property values. Overnight, public opinion shifted dramatically from seeing me as a troublemaker to viewing Samantha as an out-of-control HOA president who'd completely lost it. The community demanded an emergency HOA meeting at this time to address Samantha's misconduct, not mine. The meeting was held in the same bland beige room, but now it was packed and tense. Samantha sat at the front table, looking pale and defeated, while I set up my laptop and connected it to the big screen. This time, I was officially invited, and not as a defendant, but as a witness presenting evidence of criminal harassment by an HOA officer. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, addressing the crowd, "I think it's time everyone saw exactly what your HOA president has been doing in your name." I played the security footage on the large screen. The room fell utterly silent, As if a pin had dropped, people watched Samantha's trespassing in crystal clear detail. When the video showed her dumping chemicals into the lake, several gasps echoed around the room. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with shock and embarrassment. These were decent folks who had trusted Samantha to represent their community with professionalism. Instead, she'd been waging a personal vendetta, breaking multiple laws in the process. Questions flew immediately. "Is that really you in the video, Samantha?" asked an elderly man in the front row. "Why were you on his property?" demanded a mother with 2 small children. "What exactly did you dump in the lake?" shouted someone from the back. At first, Samantha tried to deny everything, claiming the video was fake or edited. But when a tech-savvy resident offered to verify the footage's authenticity by checking the camera's metadata, she finally broke down. "I was just trying to protect our community," she sobbed. "He was so difficult, so disrespectful of our authority. I thought if the lake tested positive for contamination, the county would force him to stop swimming there." The room erupted in angry voices. People were furious that Samantha had lied to them, manipulated their trust to support her personal crusade, and committed crimes in the community's name. Several residents stood and demanded her immediate resignation from the HOA board. Others spoke about the legal liabilities she had created for the entire association. Tom Wilson, a retired teacher who'd come to my barbecue, stood and addressed the group. "I don't know about you all, but I'm embarrassed that this woman has represented us. She's made us a laughingstock and put us at risk of lawsuits. She needs to go and she needs to make this right with Patrick." The vote to remove Samantha from the HOA board was unanimous, 32 in favor, 0 opposed, with Samantha abstaining. The decision to authorize payment of my $5,000 damage claim was just as decisive. Several neighbors personally apologized to me for the harassment I'd endured. The newly appointed interim president promised a formal apology letter would be sent alongside the payment. As the meeting ended and people filed out, Samantha sat alone at the front table, staring down at her hands, likely realizing how quickly her power trip had spiraled into a criminal and financial disaster. The next morning, Samantha's lawyer called me to arrange payment and discuss settlement terms. She would pay the $5,000 damages, issue a written public apology to me and the community, resign permanently from all HOA leadership roles, and agree to stay off my property for life. In return, I agreed not to press criminal charges or pursue further civil action. It was a fair deal, giving her a chance to avoid jail time while ensuring she'd never misuse her authority again. I thought receiving my $5,000 was the end of the story. It turned out to be just the beginning of Samantha's troubles. The cashier's check arrived on Friday, accompanied by a carefully worded apology letter clearly drafted by her lawyer. The letter avoided admitting criminal guilt but acknowledged she'd exceeded her authority and made poor judgments, causing me undue stress and expense. Most importantly, it included her permanent resignation and a promise to stay off my property. I deposited the check that afternoon, feeling a deep satisfaction as those numbers hit my account. Justice had been served and it tasted exactly as sweet as I'd hoped. The community's response to Samantha's downfall was swift and thorough. Within 2 weeks, a for sale sign appeared in her front yard, and neighbors spotted moving trucks packing up her house. Word spread fast that she was relocating out of state, presumably to start fresh somewhere that didn't know about her criminal trespassing and chemical dumping escapades. The new HOA leadership wasted no time distancing themselves from her reign of terror. They implemented new policies requiring board approval for enforcement actions and clarified the association's actual authority. A formal letter was sent to every property owner within a mile, making clear the HOA had no jurisdiction beyond the community. Linda Peterson, the former enthusiastic Samantha supporter, posted